Joined on the line by Free Market Foundation Director Jason Urbach. Very good evening to you, Mr. Urbach. What are your thoughts as the Free Market Foundation? What's your overall response to the budget? It was a difficult one to balance, but some reaction says that he did an okay job. Is that your thought?
Yeah, Peter, I think, well, firstly, good evening to you and good evening to the listeners. I thought it was a very difficult time. I mean, not only difficult circumstances within South Africa, but also within the global context. But the biggest kind of red herring for me was the continued rise of tax to GDP ratio, which is it's going to be problematic, and it is something that we're going to look out for because, you know, the old saying is, blessed are the young, for they'll inherit our debt. So that is something that we're going to have to cut back on government expenditure moving forward. And I think there were a lot of promising things that came out. For example, we recognize the importance of small, medium, and micro enterprises for fostering economic growth within the economy, and she promised to ease the regulatory burdens for business, which from the FMF's perspective, certainly we find something like that is very encouraging, although he didn't give too much detail on what exactly that we're going to do. But I think all South Africans should rejoice at the fact that it'll be easier to do business in South Africa, because obviously red tape ultimately benefits big business who have the resources to manage the kind of complex quagmire of compliance requirements that go along with red tape. But whatever government gives with one hand, they tend to kind of take with the other. And I think the real elephant in the room that we all knew about is and which Minister Gordhan repeated in the budget speech, is the national minimum wage that will be coming in. And if we're looking specifically at SMEs, which is what I was discussing earlier, I think you've got to remember that NEDLAC comprises of big business trade unions, and the national minimum wage adversely affects small and medium micro enterprises because in the absence of a national minimum wage, the unskilled and inexperienced will typically or ordinarily find jobs in those SMEs, and that's with the view to kind of working their way up the economic ladder. But the proposed national minimum wage obviously criminalizes any employer that's willing to risk employing a young and inexperienced person at the wage rate that reflects their skill level. So, yeah, it certainly was a mixed bag, and we had caution on the rising tax to GDP ratio that's occurring.
All right. So, bottom line, small business better off or not with this budget?
Well, as I said, you know, the wage component is probably the biggest kind of cost overhead within a small, medium, and micro enterprise. And if you introducing a national minimum wage, that will adversely affect the small, medium, and micro enterprises. What it'll do is it'll force more people into the informal sector and force more of those SMEs kind of underground. And that's a rational response to increasing the regulations that you impose on them. So I think there's a certainty that the kind of economic consequences of introducing the national minimum wage are entirely predictable. What employers do when the cost of employing people is increased is simple. They either employ fewer people or they reduce the hours of work. So some employers may choose to forgo profits, but obviously that's going to stall investment in their businesses, which will halt any expansion. So they won't hire take on any new workers, and it will also eventually cause existing workers' wages to stagnate. And another thing that they'll do is to increase prices. And if they increase prices of their product, it's not rich people that are affected by increase in prices. It's poor people who are extremely sensitive to even minor adjustments or minor increases in the price level. So, yeah, those are some of the sentiments specifically regarding small, medium, and micro enterprises. I think his comments on the tax credits for medical schemes are also worrying. It kind of reinforces government's move to introduce a national health insurance at the expense of the private sector in South Africa. So we've seen a lot of move towards, the demarcation regulations that were gazetted in December last year that kind of ban primary health insurance products. And if you reduce the tax credit, so the tax credit for the medical aid contribution was introduced to encourage individuals to pay more towards their own medical expenses so that they don't rely on the state or the government sector for providing medical care. Now, if you propose to scrap the tax exemptions, it's basically kind of a ploy to get more money out of taxpayers at the expense of the private medical care sector. And by eliminating that tax credit, what you do is that you increase the cost of private medical schemes, or drive up the cost of them and make them too expensive for new members to join, and it will also cause those at the margins to drop out. And if you have fewer people on private medical schemes, it will swell the kind of numbers that you're relying on the public sector, and that's not what you want. You want those who can afford to pay for their own private medical schemes. Sorry?
So quite a lot to consider then. Perhaps one final point. You've been talking tax quite a bit, and you said the ratio to GDP. I just want to get your thoughts perhaps on the increase in the dividend tax, because that's a way that a lot of these small businesses will be getting their money out of their businesses through dividends, and then there's this increased tax burden now. Yeah,
sure. So, I mean, the government was obviously looking for pennies wherever it could. So, I mean, it was politically not viable to increase that, and I mean, especially in the year that we're in. And because also, if you increase that, it's a regressive tax because it disproportionately affects the poorest members of society. So they had to increase personal income taxes. They weren't going to increase company income tax when you're kind of desperately looking for because we have such low levels of savings in South Africa, you're desperately looking for all the kind of investments that drive increased capital formation, which leads to increased productivity levels and higher wages. So you don't want to be taxing companies. They have to look for things like personal income tax, which are kind of effectively what a withholding tax on dividends is. So, I think that was to be expected.
Okay, Mr. Urbach, thank you very much for joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts with us. I'm sure there'll be much deliberation over the next coming days about the implications of today's budget, but thank you for your thoughts this evening. That was Director Yason Urbach from the Free Market Foundation.